The night was cold and silent, the kind of silence that feels heavier than sound. Rain drizzled over the broken windows of a small apartment where Ethan sat alone, staring at a crumpled letter in his trembling hands. His world had collapsed, his company gone bankrupt, his wife left him, and the house he'd worked his whole life for had just been taken by the bank. He looked around. Empty bottles, unpaid bills, and the echo of a life that used to mean something. For a long time, Ethan had been the kind of man everyone admired, confident, generous, successful. But life has a cruel way of testing the strength you claim to have. And now, stripped of everything, he wasn't sure who he was anymore. That night, he walked through the city streets without an umbrella, the rain soaking through his worn-out jacket. He had no destination, just an overwhelming urge to disappear. But as he reached a bridge, a flicker of movement caught his eye. A young boy, maybe 10 years old, sat under the bridge, shivering, clutching a piece of bread in his small hands. The boy looked up at Ethan with eyes that knew pain far too early. "Are you hungry?" the boy asked softly, offering him half of the bread. Ethan froze. He hadn't eaten in a day. But it wasn't the bread that broke him, it was the boy's kindness. He knelt down, tears mixing with rain. "Why would you give that to me?" he whispered. "Because," the boy said, "you look like you need it more than I do." In that moment, something inside Ethan cracked open. The man who had lost everything felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. He took the bread, but what he truly accepted was a message. He stayed with the boy that night, talking until dawn. The boy's name was Liam, an orphan who had been living on the streets for months. Despite his circumstances, Liam laughed easily, dreamed loudly, and spoke of a future that didn't yet exist, but one he believed in with all his heart. The next morning, Ethan woke to sunlight cutting through the gray sky. For the first time in weeks, he didn't feel lost. He decided then he wouldn't let his failures define him. He would rebuild not just for himself, but for Liam, and for anyone who had ever been forgotten by life. He sold the last thing he owned, his old watch, a gift from his father, and used the money to buy breakfast for both of them. Then he walked into a construction site, asked for a job, and started from the bottom. Every day was hard. Every muscle ached. But every night, when he came back to the small shelter where Liam waited, Ethan felt alive. He taught the boy how to read, how to dream, how to never give up even when the world tells you to. And as days turned into months, something miraculous began to happen. Ethan started saving. He learned new skills. He climbed from worker to supervisor, from supervisor to site manager. People began to notice him again, not the man who had lost everything, but the man who had refused to stay down. His eyes carried stories of pain, but also fire, an unshakable belief that broken things can be rebuilt. And soon that fire spread. He founded a small organization that provided jobs and education for homeless children. The very streets that once swallowed him now whispered his name in gratitude. But he didn't do it for fame. He did it because one rainy night, a boy shared his last piece of bread. Years later, Ethan stood on the same bridge where he had once thought of ending it all. Beside him stood Liam, now grown, now strong, now ready to take the torch. The city lights shimmered on the river below, and Ethan smiled. "You saved me that night," he said quietly. Liam shook his head. "No, you saved yourself. I just reminded you who you were." The words sank deep into Ethan's heart. He looked up at the sky, whispering to himself, "You can lose everything, but never lose faith." Because sometimes rock bottom isn't the end. It's the place you start building again. He watched the sunrise break through the clouds, golden light washing over the world, and for the first time in years, Ethan truly believed in tomorrow. And then, he stood there for a long time, the warmth of the sunrise touching his face, the wind carrying a soft whisper of the city waking up. People rushed past below, cars hummed, life moved on, but Ethan felt still, anchored in a quiet peace he hadn't known before. The river flowed beneath him, endlessly, just like time. It carried everything away, pain, memories, regret, and made room for something new. He and Liam began walking toward the small center they had built together. It wasn't much, just an old warehouse they'd repaired with donated wood and paint, but inside it, dreams were being rebuilt every single day. Children came from the streets, hungry, cold, and afraid. And there, within those walls, they found warmth, food, and hope. When Ethan stepped inside, a chorus of small voices shouted, "Uncle Ethan." He smiled, that same rare, genuine smile that once felt impossible. He knelt down, ruffling the hair of a little girl who ran into his arms. She was barefoot, her clothes worn, but her eyes sparkled with life. "Did you finish your reading today?" he asked. She nodded eagerly, holding up a torn notebook filled with shaky handwriting. He praised her, and she beamed with pride. Every corner of the room told a story. A boy sketching a future city he wanted to build. A girl practicing songs on a broken guitar. A group learning numbers from chalk drawn on the floor. Ethan watched it all quietly, a lump forming in his throat. He had lost everything once, yet somehow, in losing, he had found something far greater: purpose. Liam entered, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You're up early," he said, handing one to Ethan. "I could say the same," Ethan chuckled. "You didn't even sleep, did you?" Liam grinned. Someone had to fix the lights before the kids arrived. Ethan took a sip and glanced around. "It's strange, isn't it? The same city that once broke me now feels like home again." Liam nodded. "Because this time, you're not chasing success. You're building meaning." Ethan smiled faintly, but deep inside, he knew the truth of those words. Success wasn't about money or fame anymore. It was about moments, small, quiet moments where one act of kindness could change everything. Later that day, a visitor came. A woman in a navy blue suit, holding a notepad, stood at the entrance. "Are you Mr. Ethan Clark?" she asked. "Yes, that's me," he replied, wiping dust from his hands. "I'm from the city council. We've heard about your center. The impact you've had on these children is remarkable. We'd like to discuss a partnership, funding, expansion, maybe turning this into an official rehabilitation and education program." For a moment, Ethan couldn't speak. He had dreamed of this quietly for years, never believing it could truly happen. That would be incredible," he finally said. As she left, Liam laughed, slapping his shoulder. "You see? You built something real, Ethan. You didn't just rebuild your life, you rebuilt others too." Ethan smiled, but his eyes shimmered with tears. He looked out at the sky again, thinking about that rainy night years ago, the night he met Liam, the night he almost gave up. He whispered to himself, "Every fall has a reason. Sometimes it's to help someone else rise." Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The center grew. More children came, more volunteers joined. Donations poured in from people inspired by Ethan's story. Yet even as life became busy, Ethan never stopped visiting that old bridge once a week. He'd stand there quietly, letting the wind remind him of how far he had come. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the city lights began to flicker on, he found a boy sitting on the same spot he once sat, head bowed, tears dripping onto the concrete. Ethan approached slowly. "Hey," he said gently. "You okay?" The boy flinched, wiping his eyes quickly. "Leave me alone." "I will," Ethan said softly, "but not until you tell me what brought you here." The boy looked up, eyes swollen. "Everything's gone wrong. My parents, they left. I've got nowhere to go. I'm tired." Ethan's heart clenched. He saw himself in that boy, the same pain, the same hopelessness. He sat down beside him, not speaking for a while. Then quietly he said, "Years ago, I sat right here too. I thought my life was over. But someone showed you a little kindness. Just enough to remind me I still mattered." The boy frowned. Did it help? Ethan nodded slowly. "More than you can imagine." He pulled a small card from his pocket and handed it to him. "This is the address of our center. Come by tomorrow morning. You'll have food, a place to sleep, and people who care." The boy hesitated, staring at the card, then looked at Ethan again. "Why are you helping me?" "Because once," Ethan said with a soft smile, "someone helped me when I didn't deserve it." That night, Ethan walked home with quiet satisfaction. He didn't need applause or recognition. The universe had already given him its greatest reward, a second chance, and the ability to give it to others. As he entered his small apartment, he found a box on his desk. Inside was an old, cracked watch, the same one he had sold years ago. There was a note attached. "Found this at a pawn shop. Thought it should return to the man who never gave up. Liam." Ethan held the watch to his chest, closing his eyes. The ticking sound was faint, but to him, it was the rhythm of life, a reminder that no matter how many times the hands go back, they always keep moving forward. He placed it on the shelf beside a photo of the children at the center and whispered, "We never really lose everything. We just start again differently." Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, rain beginning to fall once more. But this time, Ethan didn't see the storm as an ending. He saw it as a cleansing, a promise that even after the darkest nights, the world still finds a way to shine. And somewhere deep in the city, another lost soul was about to find that same light. carried quietly in the echoes of Ethan's story, a story that was still being written with every act of hope, every tear wiped away, and every broken heart that dared to keep beating. The rain continued through the night, a gentle rhythm against the windows as Ethan sat near his desk, watching the drops slide down the glass. Each droplet seemed to carry a memory, a fragment of the man he once was and the life he had rebuilt. He felt a strange stillness, not emptiness, but peace, the kind that comes when you finally understand why things had to break before they could heal. Liam entered quietly, shaking the water from his jacket. "The storm's getting stronger," he said, setting down a folder full of papers. "But the kids are all safe. They're asleep." Ethan nodded. "Good." He turned his gaze to the small photograph on his desk, the children laughing in front of the center, their hands raised to the sky. For years, he had searched for happiness in wealth, recognition, success. But true happiness, he had learned, looked a lot like this, a small smile in the middle of chaos, a sense of belonging among those who once had none. Liam sat across from him, his expression thoughtful. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't met that night?" Ethan smiled faintly. "Every day. I think I would have disappeared into the darkness. But meeting you gave me something to live for, a reason to stand again." Liam leaned back in his chair. "You know, I used to think strength meant never falling. But watching you, I realized it's about how you rise after you've fallen harder than ever before." Ethan chuckled softly. "Maybe that's why we meet the people we do, to remind us of who we're meant to be." The thunder rumbled again outside, low and distant, as if echoing his words. Ethan stood up, looking out over the city. Neon lights shimmered on the wet pavement below. He could see his reflection in the glass, older, lined, weathered, but alive. Truly alive. The next morning, the air was crisp and clean, the streets shining after the rain. Ethan arrived at the center early, as he always did, unlocking the front doors before sunrise. The smell of damp earth and fresh paint filled the air. He walked through the quiet rooms, checking on supplies, books, and beds. He paused in front of the mural the children had painted on one wall. It showed a bright sun rising over a bridge, with a line of figures walking toward it, some big, some small, some holding hands. Above it, written in uneven letters, were the words, "No one is truly lost." Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat. He reached out, touching the painted sun with his fingertips, as though he could feel its warmth through the wall. By mid-morning, the building came alive with laughter and chatter. The children gathered for breakfast, passing around bowls of rice and fruit. Ethan helped serve food, sharing jokes, listening to stories. There was a girl who wanted to be a doctor, a boy who dreamed of flying planes, another who simply said he wanted a home that never disappears. Later that day, a journalist came to interview Ethan about the center. Cameras flashed, questions poured in. But when they asked him what inspired his work, he didn't talk about loss or failure or redemption. He simply said, "One boy shared his last piece of bread with me when I had nothing left. That moment changed everything." The reporter smiled, perhaps expecting a longer answer, but Ethan didn't feel the need to say more. The story was already written in the faces around him. Weeks passed. The center expanded into neighboring towns. Volunteers came from across the country. Some were teachers, some doctors, others just people who wanted to help. Yet even as the work grew, Ethan made sure to keep one promise, to never forget where it began. One evening, he visited a small shop on the corner of the street. Inside, the smell of coffee and baked bread filled the air. The owner, a kind elderly woman, smiled at him. "Mr. Clark," she said, "I heard your story on the radio today. You've done something remarkable." Ethan smiled politely. "Thank you. But honestly, I just tried to do what I wish someone had done for me." The woman handed him a cup of coffee. Sometimes that's all the world needs, one person brave enough to care. He thanked her and stepped back outside. The sky was streaked with gold and violet, the last light of day fading into twilight. He walked toward the bridge, his steps slow, deliberate. The same place that once held his despair now felt sacred. The wind brushed against his face, the river below shimmering in the fading sun. He thought about the boy he'd helped weeks ago, who had since joined the center and started learning carpentry. He thought about Liam, who was now teaching classes himself. He thought about the countless faces who had found hope because one night, years ago, he hadn't given up. As he stood there, a thought came quietly. Maybe that's what life is. Not a straight road, not endless sunshine, but a series of storms that shape us, push us, cleanse us until we learn how to see beauty even in the rain. He took out his old watch, the one Liam had returned to him, and stared at it ticking steadily in his palm. The sound was soft, steady, the sound of persistence, of time refusing to stop no matter how many times it breaks. He closed his hand around it, whispering to the wind, "As long as it keeps ticking, I'll keep going." And with that, he turned back toward the city, the lights now glowing brighter as darkness deepened. The road ahead was uncertain, but this time, uncertainty didn't scare him. It reminded him that he was still moving forward, still breathing, still building. When he reached the center, he found Liam sitting on the steps, talking to a few of the kids about tomorrow's plans, a new classroom, a bigger kitchen, more beds. Ethan joined them, the sound of laughter wrapping around him like a familiar song. He realized then that the most beautiful thing about starting over isn't what you gain, but who you become in the process, a little stronger, a little softer, and infinitely more human. The rain began again, light and gentle, as if blessing everything it touched. Ethan tilted his face upward, letting it wash over him. He smiled, the same quiet smile of a man who had once fallen into the dark and found light waiting for him at the bottom. The watch ticked in his pocket, steady as his heart, marking each second of a story still unfolding. A story built not on what he had lost, but on everything he had found after. The sound of rain softened, fading into the distance as the night grew quiet again. The children had gone to sleep. The lights inside the center dimmed, leaving only the warm glow of a few lamps flickering across the walls. Ethan sat by the window, a notebook open in front of him. The pages were filled with sketches, notes, and dreams, ideas for the future. He didn't write to plan anymore. He wrote to remember. His handwriting was shaky, but full of purpose. He jotted down the things he wanted to build: a library, a playground, a small art studio where the children could paint the world the way they wished it to be. Each word carried a piece of his heart, like planting seeds for tomorrow. Liam walked in quietly, holding 2 mugs of tea. "Couldn't sleep again?" he asked, placing one on the table beside him. Ethan smiled faintly. "Too many thoughts. The more we build, the more I realize how much more we need to do." Liam chuckled, taking a seat opposite him. "You'll never stop dreaming, will you?" "Dreaming," Ethan said softly, "is the only thing that kept me alive when I had nothing left." They sat in silence for a while, the quiet hum of rain on the roof filling the space. The air smelled of wet soil and tea leaves, calm and grounding. Ethan looked at Liam and felt a deep sense of pride. The boy who once offered him half a piece of bread was now a man standing beside him, leading, teaching, giving hope to others just as he once did for him. "I've been thinking," Liam said after a pause. "We should open another center, somewhere far from a city. There are villages where kids don't even have shoes, let alone schools." Ethan looked up, surprised. "You're ready for that?" Liam nodded, eyes shining. "You taught me that if you wait until you're ready, you'll never start. I think it's time." Ethan smiled, his chest swelling with emotion. "Then let's do it. We'll start small, just like before." The next morning, they began making calls, gathering volunteers, speaking to local communities. Word spread quickly. People wanted to help. Donations arrived from strangers who had heard Ethan's story, not just because it inspired them, but because it made them believe again in the power of rebuilding. Days turned into weeks of planning and travel. They visited remote areas where children walked miles through the mud to reach a crumbling school. In one village, an old man approached Ethan, bowing his head slightly. "We've heard about you," he said in a trembling voice. "If you can give these children a chance to learn, they will never forget it." Ethan placed a hand over his heart. "That's all I want, for them to have the chance I once lost." Together with Liam, he began construction. The ground was uneven, the resources limited, but they worked tirelessly, sometimes through the night. Local villagers joined, offering their hands, their tools, their faith. Slowly, wooden frames became walls, walls became rooms, and rooms filled with laughter. On the day the new center opened, dozens of children gathered outside the small building painted in bright yellow. They clapped, cheered, and sang songs they had written themselves. Ethan stood at the entrance, eyes glistening. "This place," he told them, "belongs to you. It's not built by money or power, it's built by hope. And hope, once planted, never dies." The children clapped again, and one little girl ran up to him, holding a flower she had picked from the roadside. "Thank you," she said shyly, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan took the flower, his throat tightening. "No," he said softly, "thank you for reminding me why I'm still here." As the day ended, He walked alone along the edge of the field, watching the sun dip below the hills. The sky turned gold, then deep red. He could hear the children's laughter echoing behind him, blending with the wind that carried the scent of wet earth and wildflowers. For a moment, he closed his eyes and let the sound sink into him, the sound of life, of continuation, of everything he thought he'd lost returning in a different form. That night, he sat by a small fire outside the center, Liam beside him. "Do you ever miss the old life?" Liam asked suddenly. Before all this, Ethan stared into the flames for a long time before answering. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "but not the way you'd think. I miss the simplicity of believing that success would make me happy. I miss the ignorance of not knowing what truly matters. But I wouldn't go back. I had to lose everything to see the world clearly." Liam nodded slowly. "You found purpose in pain." Ethan smiled. "Maybe that's what pain is meant for, to carve space for something better." The fire crackled softly between them, sparks rising into the dark sky. Ethan leaned back, feeling the warmth on his face. He thought about how fragile everything was, life, dreams, time, and yet how beautiful it became when shared with others. When morning came, he woke before dawn and walked to the nearby stream. The water reflected the early light, still and silver. He crouched down, cupping the cool water in his hands. For the first time in years, he felt completely free, free from guilt, from fear, from the ghosts of who he used to be. He took a deep breath and smiled to himself. "You made it," he whispered. "Not to the top, but back to your truth." Behind him, Liam called out, "Breakfast's ready." Ethan turned, laughing softly. "You always know how to ruin a dramatic moment." They walked back together, side by side, the laughter of the children waiting ahead of them. The smell of bread and smoke filled the air. Ethan felt something he hadn't in a very long time, not just peace, but belonging. He realized that his life had become a circle. The man who had once been saved was now saving others, and those he saved would someday do the same. As he looked at their faces, bright, full of wonder, he knew that even when he was gone, his story wouldn't end. It would live in every small act of kindness, in every dream that refused to die, in every soul that found light after darkness. The sun climbed higher, the golden rays spilling across the hills and fields. Ethan stood quietly for a moment, letting the light warm his skin. The watch in his pocket ticked softly, steady as ever, marking another moment in a life that had learned to rise again, no matter how many times it had fallen. And as the day unfolded, he carried that rhythm with him, not as a reminder of what was lost, but as a song of everything still left to give. The day stretched long and golden, the kind of day that makes time feel slow and forgiving. Ethan walked through the fields with a notebook tucked under his arm, the children running ahead, their laughter echoing through the open sky. The scent of freshly baked bread and wildflowers floated in the air. He watched them chase butterflies, their feet leaving small prints in the soft dirt, and for a moment he forgot everything, his losses, his pain, his years of struggle. All he saw were smiles that existed because he didn't give up. As he reached the edge of the field, a boy came running toward him, out of breath. "Uncle Ethan," he shouted, his voice excited. "There's someone here to see you." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "To see me?" The boy nodded quickly and pointed toward the small wooden gate. Ethan walked back, brushing the dust off his shirt. Standing near the entrance was a woman in her 40s, holding an umbrella against the sun. Her face was unfamiliar, but her eyes carried a warmth that made him pause. "Mr. Clark," she asked gently, "my name is Grace. I work with the foundation that funded your first building in the city." Ethan shook her hand, smiling politely. "Yes, I remember the partnership. Please come in." Grace looked around as they walked. Children were painting on the walls, some reading under a tree, others helping in the small garden. "It's beautiful here," she said softly. "Peaceful. You've created something rare." Ethan shrugged modestly. "It's not me. It's them. I just built a place for their hope to grow." They reached the small porch where Liam was fixing a broken chair. Grace glanced at him curiously. "Is that your son?" Ethan smiled faintly. "Not by blood, but in every other way, yes." She nodded with understanding. "I've been following your story for a while, Mr. Clark. The foundation would like to help expand your program globally. We believe what you've built could inspire others to do the same." For a moment, Ethan was silent. His eyes moved toward the children, toward the hills stretching endlessly beyond. "That's a big step," he said finally. We need people who understand what this is really about. It's not charity. It's connection. Grace smiled. That's exactly why we chose you. They spent the afternoon discussing ideas, plans, logistics. Liam joined, eager and focused, sketching designs for the new centers. As they talked, Ethan felt that old fire stirring inside him again, not the hunger for success, but for impact. This time, the dream wasn't about building a name. It was about building lives. When the meeting ended, Grace left with promises to return soon. The sky had turned orange, clouds glowing like embers. Ethan stood watching her car disappear down the dirt road. Liam came up beside him, wiping his hands on his jeans. You're thinking about saying yes, aren't you? Ethan smiled softly. I'm thinking about what it means to say yes. Liam tilted his head. You mean the responsibility? More than that, Ethan said. Every time we build something new, we carry a piece of the old with us. The pain, the lessons, the faith. I just want to make sure we never forget where this started. Liam nodded slowly. We won't, because I won't let us. Ethan laughed quietly. You've grown into quite the leader. Liam grinned. I learned from the best. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, Ethan walked outside again. The stars burned bright above him, scattered like shards of light across the black sky. He sat on a wooden bench near the garden, listening to the faint hum of crickets. In the stillness, he thought of the past, the man he used to be, the mistakes he made, the nights he thought he wouldn't survive. He thought of the boy under the bridge, the piece of bread, the moment everything changed. He whispered to the night, "Thank you." The words disappeared into the air, but they felt alive, like a prayer carried by the wind. The following days were busy. Volunteers came with supplies, new teachers arrived, and construction began for an additional classroom. The sound of hammers and laughter filled the mornings. Ethan found himself working side by side with the children, showing them how to measure, paint, and build. He wanted them to understand that creation came from their own hands, that no one was helpless when they chose to rise. One afternoon, as he lifted a wooden beam, a young boy beside him asked, "Uncle Ethan, were you always this strong?" Ethan smiled, wiping sweat from his brow. "No," he said. "I became strong because I was once broken. Sometimes the cracks in us let the light in." The boy looked puzzled for a moment, then nodded thoughtfully, as if the words would stay with him forever. When evening came, the children gathered around the fire, singing songs they had learned at school. Liam played a small guitar, and Ethan clapped along, the rhythm slow and steady. The flames danced, casting golden light on their faces. It felt like magic, not the kind from stories, but the kind born from endurance, love, and forgiveness. Later, as the children drifted off to sleep, Ethan stayed behind, staring into the dying embers. He thought of the offer from Grace, of the possibility to take their mission beyond the hills, to places where hope was still a foreign word. A part of him hesitated, remembering how ambition once destroyed him. But this time, ambition felt different, softer, purer, guided not by ego, but by purpose. Liam approached quietly. "You're awake again." Ethan smiled. "Just thinking." Liam sat beside him. "You're wondering if we're ready." "Yes," Ethan admitted. "Because when I first started, I wasn't ready at all. I was lost, desperate, angry. And yet somehow, everything led me here." Liam poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks upward. "Maybe that's the point. You don't wait until you're ready. You start, and life shapes you along the way." Ethan looked at him, proud beyond words. "You sound wiser than I ever was." "I had a good teacher," Liam said simply. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of everything they built together, everything that still lay ahead. The stars flickered brighter, the nights stretching wide and endless. Ethan leaned back, watching the sky. "You know," he said quietly, "when I lost everything, I thought my life was over. But now I see, sometimes, you have to lose your way to find your purpose." Liam nodded, his voice soft. "And sometimes you have to fall to learn how to carry others." Ethan smiled at that, his eyes glimmering in the firelight. "Then let's keep carrying them." The flames crackled gently, fading to embers. The night air turned cool, and the world felt vast and full of promise. Somewhere beyond the horizon, new dawns waited, new faces, new stories, all connected by a single truth he had learned through pain and love alike, that even after everything is taken from you, life still has a way of giving back, piece by piece, in the quiet moments you never expect. The morning came quietly. the kind of dawn that painted everything in gold. The mist hovered low over the fields, the air cool and alive with the smell of wet grass. Ethan woke early, as he always did, and stepped outside before anyone else stirred. He walked barefoot through the dew-soaked earth, feeling the cold bite of it between his toes. The horizon was turning from gray to amber, and somewhere in the distance, a rooster crowed. He looked around at what they had built, the simple classrooms made of wood and tin, the laughter waiting to fill the air, the small garden where the children had planted vegetables with their own hands. Every detail felt alive, like the earth itself remembered his journey. Years ago, he would have looked at this and seen something incomplete. Now he saw something sacred. Liam joined him a few minutes later, rubbing sleep from his eyes and handing him a cup of tea. "You're up before the sun again," he murmured, his voice still rough with sleep. Ethan smiled, accepting the cup. "The world feels quieter before people wake. I like to listen to it breathe." Liam looked out at the hills. "Grace called last night. She said the foundation wants to begin preparations next month. They're sending a team to help us design the first international center." Ethan took a sip of the tea, its warmth cutting through the chill. "It's happening faster than I thought," he said softly. "But maybe that's a good thing. Life doesn't wait until we're ready." Liam chuckled. "That's your line." Ethan laughed quietly, shaking his head. "And yet every time I say it, I realize how true it is. I wasn't ready for any of this. Not the failure, not the pain, not the rebuilding. But sometimes, life doesn't ask if you're ready. It just hands you the moment, and you have to decide who you'll be inside it." The sun began to rise, spreading golden light across the fields. The children started waking one by one, their voices echoing through the compound. The smell of porridge drifted through the air. Ethan and Liam walked back together, the morning alive with small, beautiful noises, laughter, footsteps, birdsong, the distant clang of pots. By mid-morning, they were back in the main hall, helping the children with lessons. Ethan watched as one of the older girls, Anna, helped a group of younger ones learn to write their names. She was patient, kind, and confident, qualities Ethan had seen grow in her over the months. She caught him watching and smiled shyly before turning back to her students. He felt his chest tighten with pride. These children weren't just learning words and numbers, they were learning to believe in themselves. And that belief would carry them far beyond these walls. Later that afternoon, a storm rolled in from the west. The sky darkened, thunder rumbling in the distance. The wind picked up, scattering dust and leaves across the yard. Ethan helped the children move inside, closing the shutters as the first drops of rain began to fall. Within minutes, it became a downpour, heavy and relentless. The sound of rain against the roof filled the room. The children gathered around him, some reading, others drawing. One little boy tugged at his sleeve. "Uncle Ethan," he said, "were you ever scared of storms?" Ethan smiled gently. "I used to be. When I was your age, I thought storms were dangerous. But later, I learned they help the world grow. The rain feeds the earth. The thunder clears the air. Sometimes what sounds frightening is what helps life begin again." The boy thought for a moment, then nodded. "So storms aren't bad?" "No," Ethan said softly. "They just remind us to wait for the sun." The boy smiled and went back to his drawing, sketching a rainbow over a field. Ethan watched him, feeling something shift inside, a quiet gratitude that even his worst memories had led him here to moments like this. When the rain finally eased, the air smelled clean and new. The clouds broke apart, and sunlight spilled through, glinting off puddles on the ground. Liam came to stand beside him, looking out at the shining world. "You always find beauty in everything," he said. Ethan laughed lightly. "No, I just learned to look long enough to see it." They walked outside together. The children splashed in puddles, shouting and laughing. The rainbow the boy had drawn earlier now stretched across the real sky, soft and brilliant. Ethan tilted his head up, smiling at the sight. In that moment, he thought about all the storms he had survived, the heartbreaks, the failures, the loneliness, and how every one of them had prepared him for this. Life, he realized, wasn't about avoiding pain. It was about what you build from it. The next few weeks passed quickly. Plans for the expansion moved forward, and people from different parts of the world reached out, wanting to be part of their mission. Letters arrived from strangers, teachers, artists, parents, all touched by the story of the man who had lost everything but refused to stay down. One evening, Ethan sat reading those letters by candlelight. One message in particular caught his attention. It was from a man named Robert, who wrote, "Your story saved my life. I was ready to give up. Then I heard about you, and I realized it's never too late to start again. Thank you for reminding me that even broken hearts can be mended. Ethan read it twice, then folded the paper carefully and placed it inside his notebook. He stared at the candle flame for a long moment. His eyes shimmered, not with sorrow this time, but with quiet awe. He whispered to himself, if my pain could save someone else, then maybe it was never wasted. Liam walked in, noticing the distant look on his face. Are you okay? Ethan nodded. Yes. I was just thinking about how strange life is. How everything that once destroyed me has somehow become the reason others find hope. Liam smiled softly. You turned your wounds into light. Ethan's eyes met his. No, he said gently. We did. The candles flickered as a soft breeze moved through the open window. Outside, the moon had risen, casting silver light across the quiet compound. Ethan leaned back in his chair, the sound of distant laughter filling the night. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting it wash over him. The life he had built, the people he had saved, the boy who had saved him. And somewhere deep inside, he knew this was what he had been searching for all along. Not wealth, not recognition, but peace. The kind that comes when you stop running from your past and start building something beautiful from it. He opened his eyes again, watching the flame steady itself after the wind passed, burning stronger than before. The night deepened slowly, the stars scattered like tiny promises across the velvet sky. Ethan sat by the window, listening to the rhythm of the world outside, the chirping of crickets, the soft rustle of the wind through the trees, and the quiet pulse of life that seemed to move through everything. He took a deep breath, closing his eyes for a moment, feeling the peace that came after years of chaos. But beneath that calm, there was something else, a new stirring, a quiet whisper that told him his journey wasn't finished yet. The following morning, he woke to find Grace standing outside the main gate. She looked different, older perhaps, but her smile still carried that same warmth that had pulled him through some of his darkest days. You look like you've finally found your place, she said softly as he greeted her. He smiled, genuinely surprised to see her. And you look like you never stopped searching. Grace laughed. You know me too well. She stepped inside, her eyes scanning the compound, the classrooms, the laughter, the hope. Ethan, this is incredible. You've turned pain into something people can touch. He didn't know what to say. Compliments had never sat comfortably on his shoulders. It wasn't just me, he replied quietly. It was everyone who refused to give up when I did. Grace nodded. That's what makes it beautiful. You didn't just rebuild yourself, you built a home for others who needed a reason to believe again. They walked together through the grounds, passing children who waved and shouted his name. Grace's eyes softened as she watched them. Do they know your story? Ethan shook his head. Not all of it. They know I failed once. But they don't need the details. They just need to see that failure isn't the end. She looked at him thoughtfully. Maybe that's what the world needs to hear now. People are drowning in silence, pretending they're fine. But your story, it reminds them that broken doesn't mean finished. Her words lingered with him long after she left. That night, as he sat beneath the old tree by the river, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, the call to share again. Not for fame, not for sympathy, but for truth. So he began writing. Each word was a thread pulled from his heart, raw, honest, unpolished. He wrote about the nights he spent doubting everything, the days when he wanted to quit, and the quiet moments when life whispered, not yet. The book took months to complete. Some nights, he'd fall asleep at his desk, ink smeared on his hands. Other nights, he'd stare at the blank page, haunted by memories he thought he had buried. But with every page, he felt lighter. Each sentence was a confession, each paragraph a release. When it was done, he titled it The Light After the Fall. Liam read it first. When he finished, he didn't speak for a long time. Then, finally, he said, People need this, Ethan. They need to know that even if the world forgets them, they can still rise. Ethan hesitated. What if they see me differently? Liam smiled. Then they'll see the truth. And maybe that's enough. The book was published quietly, without fanfare or promotion. But something unexpected happened. It spread. One story at a time, one heart at a time. Readers shared passages online, quoted his words, and began writing their own letters of hope. His email inbox flooded with messages from people who had lost everything, homes, careers, love, and found comfort in his resilience. One message stood out. It was from a woman named Eliza. She wrote, I was ready to end my life. Then I stumbled upon your story. You reminded me that even ashes can grow flowers. Thank you for saving a stranger you'll never meet." Ethan read it over and over. He felt tears sting his eyes, but this time they weren't from pain. They were from gratitude, because for the first time he truly understood what purpose meant. Not success, not redemption, but the ability to give others a reason to keep going. Months passed, and the foundation grew stronger. They built new classrooms, opened a small library, and even started a mentorship program for young adults. Ethan's days were filled with laughter, stories, and small miracles. A child learning to read, a teenager deciding to stay in school, a parent volunteering to teach others. But despite all the joy, he never forgot where it began. On the night he lost everything. Sometimes he would walk down to the river alone, standing where the water touched the stones, remembering the man he once was. Broken, angry, lost. He would whisper to that version of himself, "Thank you for not giving up." Because if he had, none of this would exist. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the hills, Liam found him standing there again. "You always come here when something's on your mind," Liam said. Ethan smiled faintly. "I come here to remember that everything I needed was already inside me. I just had to stop being afraid to find it." Liam nodded. "So what now? What's next for you?" Ethan looked at the horizon, the sky ablaze with orange and crimson. "Maybe it's time to take this beyond these walls. There are people out there who haven't found their light yet. Maybe I can help them see it." And so he began traveling from small towns to big cities, speaking to people who had forgotten how to hope. He told them not about success, but about survival, about standing up when the world told them to stay down. His voice wasn't loud, but it was steady, filled with truth. And everywhere he went, hearts shifted. People cried, people smiled, people began again. In every audience, he saw a reflection of who he used to be, someone searching for a reason to believe. And he gave them the same message that had saved him. You haven't lost everything until you lose yourself. And as long as you're breathing, you can begin again. Each word felt like a promise, each story a new beginning. The man who once stood in the ashes had become the light others followed through their own darkness. And though the road stretched endlessly before him, Ethan walked it with quiet certainty, not because he had found all the answers, but because he had learned how to keep walking, even when he didn't know where it led. The seasons began to change, and with them, the rhythm of life at the center evolved. Spring brought the scent of blooming flowers and fresh earth, and the children ran through the fields barefoot, their laughter echoing across the hills. Ethan walked among them, letting the cool wind brush against his face, feeling the pulse of life in every small, ordinary moment. He thought about how far they had come, from a broken man sitting in the rain to a community thriving with hope and purpose. One morning, a group of young volunteers arrived from a city. They were eager, curious, and a little unsure of themselves. Ethan greeted each of them warmly, guiding them through the compound, showing them the classrooms, the garden, and the small library that had slowly grown into a treasure trove of stories and knowledge. "These walls hold more than bricks and paint," Ethan told them. "They hold stories of resilience, courage, and love. And now you're part of that story." The volunteers exchanged glances, some skeptical, some inspired. But by the time the children arrived, their doubts had dissolved. They saw the way Ethan interacted with the kids, patient, encouraging, never condescending, and understood that here life was measured not by power or wealth, but by impact and connection. Later that day, Ethan walked to the river, the place that had become his sanctuary. The water flowed steadily, carrying leaves and petals from the trees upstream. He closed his eyes, listening to its gentle murmur. The memory of that rainy night returned, vivid and sharp, the letter in his hands, the cold, wet streets, the boy under the bridge offering him bread. It had been so long, yet the memory was alive, as if that moment had never ended, but had quietly been shaping every step he had taken since. Liam found him there, sitting silently. "You think about that night often," he said. Ethan nodded. "I have to. It's the reason we're here. It reminds me that hope can arrive in the smallest gestures, at the moments we least expect it." Liam sat beside him, looking out over the river. "And it reminds me that one act of kindness can change the course of someone's life forever." Ethan smiled. "Exactly. That's what we teach the children here, that even when everything seems lost, a single choice can open the door to a whole new world." Weeks turned into months, and the center continued to grow. New classrooms were built, More volunteers arrived, and the children's laughter became a constant hum in the air. Ethan spent his days guiding, teaching, and listening, but he also carved time for reflection. He wrote in his notebook daily not only for himself, but for the future, a record of lessons learned, moments cherished, and dreams yet to be realized. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant hills, Ethan sat with Liam on the porch. The children were inside, quietly drawing and reading. The sky was painted in shades of orange and violet, and a soft breeze carried the scent of wet grass and flowers. "You know," Liam said quietly, "I think the world needs more people like us." Ethan looked at him, a small smile playing on his lips. "Maybe it does. But more importantly, the world needs people who believe it's possible to rise again." They sat in silence for a while, watching as fireflies began to dance across the field. Their glow was faint but persistent, like small reminders that even the darkest nights held sparks of light. The next morning, Ethan received a letter from Grace. She wrote about an opportunity to expand the program internationally, offering support and resources to reach children in distant countries who had no access to education or safety. As he read the words, a familiar stirring rose in his chest, excitement, hope, and a slight fear of stepping into the unknown. Liam leaned over his shoulder. "This could be big," he said. "Are we ready?" Ethan paused, thinking about all they had accomplished so far. The children who had once been lost had now found a home, a community, and purpose. The volunteers who had arrived uncertain now carried a confidence he had rarely seen in adults. "We're ready," he said finally. "Not because we have all the answers, but because we've learned how to keep moving forward no matter what." They spent the following weeks planning the international expansion. Ethan met with educators, psychologists, and community leaders to ensure the program would respect and adapt to different cultures while maintaining its core values: hope, resilience, and compassion. Every meeting reminded him of how far they had come, from a single, broken man sitting in the rain to a network capable of changing countless lives across the world. During this time, Ethan continued to mentor the older children, teaching them leadership, responsibility, and empathy. One evening, he watched a group of teenagers working together to repair a broken swing. They laughed, argued, and collaborated, showing the patience and creativity he had once thought he'd lost. A small girl approached him, holding a flower she had picked from a garden. "Uncle Ethan," she said shyly, "this is for you. Thank you for helping us." He knelt down, taking the flower carefully. "Thank you for reminding me why I keep going," he said softly. The days blended into nights, each one full of purpose, growth, and subtle miracles. Ethan realized that life was no longer a series of losses and setbacks, but a tapestry of small victories: the child who learned to read, the volunteer who found meaning, the stranger who discovered hope in his story. And yet, even amidst all this, he knew the journey was far from over. The world was vast, filled with those who had yet to find their light. The storms would come again, as they always did, but Ethan had learned that storms were not enemies. They were teachers, shaping resilience, patience, and courage. One late afternoon, he walked the edge of the field, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The children were laughing in the distance, their voices carrying across the golden light. Liam joined him, handing him a cup of tea. "You've built something incredible here," Liam said. "Do you ever think about where it all began?" Ethan smiled faintly. "Every day. That night in the rain, the boy under the bridge, it feels like it happened yesterday and a lifetime ago, all at once." Liam nodded. "And now we're ready to help even more, aren't we?" Ethan looked out at the hills, the sun fading into twilight. "Yes, because we've learned the only way to honor what we've survived is to share it, one life, one child, one act of hope at a time." The stars began to appear in the sky, small points of light in the growing darkness. Ethan and Liam stood quietly, the weight of everything behind them and the promise of everything ahead. The fireflies danced in the fields, the river whispered its eternal song, and Ethan felt the pulse of life once more, steady, unwavering, infinite. He whispered to himself, "No matter how many times we fall, we rise." And somewhere beyond the hills, in cities and towns yet untouched by their work, new stories were waiting to be written, lives waiting to be saved, hearts waiting to remember that hope always finds a way. The next morning arrived with a gentle mist curling over the fields, the sunlight breaking through in soft golden rays that touched everything it fell upon. Ethan woke early as usual, the rhythm of the world outside already calling him to action. He dressed quickly and walked barefoot into the dew-soaked grass, inhaling the scent of wet earth and fresh blossoms. The children were still asleep, their breathing steady and calm, and for a moment he allowed himself to savor the quiet, knowing the day ahead would be filled with noise, movement, and purpose. Liam found him near the edge of the garden, crouched down, inspecting the young plants. "You're always up before the sun," he said, a smile in his voice. Ethan looked up, smiling faintly. "The world feels different in these hours. It's softer, quieter, and I can think." Liam nodded and stood beside him, thinking about tomorrow's plans again. Ethan chuckled. "Always. But more than plans, I think about how we can help the children see themselves not just as survivors, but as people capable of shaping the world around them." The sun climbed higher, spilling warmth over the center, and soon the children began to stir. Their laughter and chatter filled the air as they came outside, running barefoot across the fields, their faces glowing with energy and joy. Ethan watched them, his heart swelling with a quiet pride that had nothing to do with himself and everything to do with the light these children carried. By mid-morning, volunteers were arriving from the city, ready to assist with the new classrooms that were under construction. Ethan guided them, showing them how to work alongside the children, how to make each act of building, painting, and planting meaningful. He wanted every person who came here to understand that it was not just a school, but a home, a sanctuary, a place where lives could be rebuilt. That afternoon, Ethan took a walk along the small dirt road that led to the river. He carried a notebook under his arm, jotting down ideas for expanding the program, improving the curriculum, and creating opportunities for older children to mentor younger ones. The wind carried the faint scent of rain, promising a storm in the distance, but did not deter him. He had learned to embrace storms, literal and figurative, as part of life's rhythm. As he walked, he noticed a small boy struggling to climb a tree near the riverbank. Ethan approached quietly, kneeling beside him. "Need a hand?" he asked gently. The boy looked up, hesitant at first, then nodded. Ethan guided him, encouraging him step by step, showing him how to find balance and grip. When the boy finally reached a branch high above, his face broke into a triumphant grin. "I did it," he shouted. "You did," Ethan said, standing and clapping. "And now remember how it feels, that strength is always inside you, even when it feels impossible." The boy jumped down and ran to join his friends, and Ethan continued along the river, thinking about how small victories often became the foundation for greater ones. Every moment of courage, every act of persistence, became a thread in the tapestry of their lives. Back at the center, Liam was organizing a lesson on teamwork for a group of teenagers. Ethan watched from a distance, noticing the way the older children took responsibility, guided the younger ones, and learned patience and empathy in the process. This was the legacy they were creating, not just shelter and education, but resilience, compassion, and self-belief. As the day wore on, clouds gathered dark and heavy. Rain began to fall in steady sheets, drumming on the roofs and turning the paths into rivulets. Ethan moved inside with the children, helping them settle into activities that could be done indoors. Some painted, others read aloud, and a few gathered around him as he told stories from his notebook, stories not of grandeur or heroism, but of ordinary people finding courage in moments of despair. The children listened, rapt, as if the words themselves carried warmth and light. Ethan felt that familiar hum in his chest, the quiet satisfaction of watching lives change because someone refused to give up. When the rain eased that evening, the air was clean and cool. Ethan stepped outside, letting the droplets kiss his face. The sky opened, revealing stars in their millions, scattered across the heavens like fragments of hope. He walked to the riverbank, kneeling to watch the water ripple and sparkle in the moonlight. Liam joined him again, handing him a cup of tea. "You think about what comes next, don't you?" he said softly. Ethan nodded. "Always. There are more places, more children, more hearts that need help. But I've learned it's not about the destination. It's about the work, the journey, the lives we touch along the way." Liam smiled. "And you've touched a lot of lives already." "Yes," Ethan said quietly, watching the water. "But the work never stops. And I don't want it to." The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Plans for international expansion moved forward, and Ethan traveled to meet educators, psychologists, and community leaders. Everywhere he went, he shared not just his vision, but his story, the nights of despair, the moments of doubt, the small acts of courage that had kept him moving forward. People listened, inspired, and began to see that failure was not final, that darkness could always be transformed into light. Back at the center, Liam managed the daily operations, teaching the older children to mentor the younger ones, instilling values of empathy, cooperation, and persistence. Ethan returned periodically, bringing new ideas, encouragement, and stories that reminded everyone that hope was not just a concept, but a practice. One afternoon, a young girl approached him with a letter. She had written it herself, carefully, in neat handwriting. "This is for you," she said shyly. Ethan took the letter, unfolding it gently. It read, "Thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. You showed me that even when life seems impossible, we can rise again." He looked at the girl, her eyes wide and earnest, and felt tears prick his own. "Thank you," he whispered. "You've reminded me why every day matters." As night fell, Ethan stood on the porch, watching the children sleep peacefully inside. The stars shimmered, the moon cast silver light over the hills, and the world felt vast yet intimate, dangerous yet full of promise. He thought about the man he had been, lost, broken, afraid, and the life he now lived, full of purpose, courage, and love. He whispered into the night, a quiet vow to himself: no matter how many storms come, no matter how many times we fall, we rise. We rise, and in rising we give others the strength to rise too. And as the wind carried his words across the fields, across rivers and mountains, across towns and cities yet untouched by his work, he knew that the story was far from over. The light he had found was not just for him. It was a spark meant to ignite countless others, one life at a time, until hope became something no darkness could ever extinguish. The fireflies began their nightly dance, the river whispered its eternal song, and Ethan felt, in that quiet moment, that the world was alive, vast, infinite, and waiting for those brave enough to keep moving forward. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges yet unseen, but for the first time he welcomed it. Because he had learned the most powerful truth of all: to rise after everything is lost is to discover the boundless strength of the human heart. And with that understanding, he took the first step into the night, carrying hope like a lantern, ready to illuminate the lives of everyone who needed it, one story at a time. The morning arrived with a crispness that made the world feel alive. Ethan walked barefoot along the dewy path, the grass wet against his feet, the earth cool and grounding. The children were already awake, running through the fields, their laughter a steady rhythm that made his heart ache with joy. He paused for a moment to watch them, letting the sun warm his face as it rose slowly over the hills. It was in these quiet moments, surrounded by life, that he felt the depth of everything he had lost and everything he had rebuilt. Liam joined him, carrying a small tray with 2 cups of tea. "You've been up for hours," he said, handing a cup to Ethan. "I wanted to see the day begin," Ethan replied softly. "Before the noise, before the work, before everything else. It's the only time the world seems fully mine." Liam smiled, taking a sip. "You've always needed a moment of stillness before diving into action." Ethan nodded. "Stillness lets me remember. It reminds me that no matter what storms come, I am capable of holding myself steady and helping others do the same." By mid-morning, the volunteers and children were gathered for lessons and activities. Ethan led a small group of teenagers in painting a mural along the classroom wall. The mural depicted the journey of life: storms, struggles, and finally, light breaking through the clouds. As he guided their hands, he spoke gently: "Every stroke matters. Every color matters. Just as in life, even the smallest choices can create something beautiful." One of the teenagers, a boy named Marcos, paused and frowned. "I don't think I'm good at this," he said. Ethan placed a hand on his shoulder. "You don't need to be perfect. You just need to try. The effort is what matters most. It's what gives your work meaning." Marcos nodded, taking a deep breath, and returned to the wall. As he painted, his confidence grew, and soon he was laughing with the others, his strokes bold and proud. Ethan watched quietly, feeling a profound sense of fulfillment. These were the moments that made every hardship he had endured worth it. Later, during lunch, he sat under the old tree by the river, watching the children play. The water reflected the sunlight in 1,000 tiny sparks, and the air smelled of wet soil and flowers. He thought about how far he had come, from the nights of despair when he felt completely alone, to this place filled with life, laughter, and hope. A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "Uncle Ethan." He looked up to see a small girl holding a notebook. "Yes, sweetie. I wrote something for you," she said shyly. Ethan took the notebook, opening it carefully. The pages were filled with short stories and drawings of the center, the children, and even Ethan himself. At the end, she had written, "Thank you for teaching us to believe in ourselves. Because of you, I know I can do anything." He felt tears prick his eyes. "Thank you," he said softly. "You've reminded me why every day is worth it." That evening, the sky darkened with heavy clouds, signaling another storm. Ethan moved inside with the children, leading them through quiet activities, reading, drawing, and sharing stories. The rain fell hard, pounding against the roof, yet inside, the warmth of the room and the comfort of the children's laughter created a sanctuary. As the storm raged outside, Ethan thought about how much storms had defined his life. Not just literal storms, but the metaphorical ones, the loss, the loneliness, the nights of despair. And he realized that each one had prepared him for this very moment. Without the darkness, he would not have understood the value of light. Without the struggle, he could not have learned the strength of hope. When the rain eased, the air smelled clean and fresh. Ethan walked outside, letting the droplets linger on his skin. The children ran past him, squealing and laughing as they splashed in puddles, their joy infectious. He bent down to scoop up a handful of water and let run through his fingers, feeling the coolness, the life, the constant motion of the world. Liam approached, holding 2 mugs of steaming tea. "You always seem to find peace in the simplest things," he said. Ethan smiled. "It's not just peace. It's understanding. Life is always moving, always changing. You can fight it, or you can let it teach you." As night fell, Ethan sat under the stars with Liam, the children asleep inside. The sky was clear, dotted with countless points of light. He felt the familiar sense of awe, the same feeling he had experienced countless times along this journey. "I was thinking," Liam said quietly, "about how far we've come. It's incredible." Ethan nodded, taking a deep breath. "It is, but we've also only just begun. There are still children out there who need a chance, still lives that need hope. Our work isn't over." The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of rain from the distant hills. Ethan felt the weight of responsibility and the lightness of purpose intertwine. He realized that his life had transformed into a rhythm of giving and receiving, teaching and learning, leading and following. Every act of kindness, every moment of courage, every word of encouragement was part of a chain that could never be broken. The following days were full of preparation for the international expansion. Ethan met with new teams, traveling to distant communities, learning about their struggles and understanding their needs. Everywhere he went, he saw children and families longing for a chance, and he shared not just resources, but the philosophy that had carried him through his darkest times, that hope is stronger than despair, and even after the deepest loss, life can be rebuilt. When he returned to the center, the children ran to greet him, their smiles wide and genuine. Ethan laughed, hugging them one by one. He realized, as he often did, that these were the moments that made every hardship meaningful. The sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the tears, they all led to this, a place where love, hope, and resilience could flourish. That night, under the glow of the moon, Ethan walked to the river alone. He looked at the water, its surface shimmering with silver light. He whispered to the night, "I will not stop. I will not give up. I will rise, and I will help others rise." The stars reflected in the rippling water, as if acknowledging his vow. Somewhere in the distance, beyond mountains, rivers, and cities, lives were waiting to be touched, hearts waiting to be lifted, souls waiting to remember their own strength. Ethan smiled quietly to himself. He understood now that his journey was endless, but was beautiful. Every step forward, every life touched, every act of hope planted was proof that even when everything is lost, the human spirit has the power to rise again, stronger, brighter, and unbroken. And with that understanding, he turned back toward the center, toward the laughter, the light, the life he had helped create, ready to continue the work that mattered most, one heart at a time. The sun rose in a brilliant display of orange and gold, spilling light across the fields, illuminating the faces of children running freely, their laughter echoing like music across the hills. Ethan stood at the edge of the compound, the wind tugging gently at his hair, and for the first time in years, he felt the full weight of everything he had endured and everything he had built. The journey from loss to purpose had been long, painful, and uncertain, but standing here now, watching life thrive in every corner of the center, he understood that every moment of despair had been a step toward this very scene. He walked among the children, his hands brushing against their small shoulders, guiding, encouraging, laughing. Each one carried a spark, a light that had been nurtured through patience, kindness, and unwavering belief. And in each spark, Ethan saw reflections of himself, the boy who had once sat alone in the rain, broken, uncertain if life would ever give him another chance. He had not only survived but had transformed that survival into something immeasurable, hope. The volunteers arrived from different towns and countries, their eyes wide with excitement and curiosity. Ethan greeted them warmly, showing them the classrooms, the gardens, the library where children pored over books and stories that sparked imagination and courage. He watched as their energy merged with the children's, creating a rhythm of creativity and care that was almost tangible. Every smile, every helping hand, every whispered word of encouragement was proof that change was not only possible, it was contagious. Later, in the quiet of the afternoon, Ethan took a solitary walk along the river. The water reflected the sun in glittering patterns, the gentle ripples a metaphor for the countless lives that had been touched, each one moving outward in waves, reaching farther than he could see. He thought of the boy under the bridge, the bread that had saved him, the nights of despair that had shaped him, and he whispered a silent gratitude for every challenge that had led him here. Without the darkness, he would not have understood the brilliance of light. Without the loss, he would not have known the value of what he now held. Returning to the center, Ethan found Liam helping a group of teenagers prepare a new project, teaching them not just skills but responsibility, empathy, and the power of perseverance. Watching the scene, Ethan realized that his work was no longer about him. It was about creating a legacy. Every child, every volunteer, every life that intersected with this place carried a fragment of his story, a testament to the strength of resilience, the beauty of compassion, and the unyielding power of hope. That evening, as the sky turned to deep purples and silver stars began to emerge, the children gathered around a fire. Ethan sat among them, listening as they shared their dreams and fears, their small victories and aspirations. He realized then that hope was not just a word. It was a living, breathing thing, nurtured through connection, understanding, and trust. Each child had become a beacon, radiating the lessons they had learned, that life could be rebuilt, that joy could coexist with pain, that love could flourish even in the aftermath of loss. The night was still, except for the gentle crackle of the fire and the whispers of the children. Ethan's mind wandered to the many people who had reached out over the years, letters from strangers, stories of lives transformed by courage, messages from those who had once felt hopeless but now dared to dream. Every story was a reminder that his pain had not been in vain, that every tear shed, every struggle endured, had contributed to a chain of hope that stretched far beyond his immediate reach. He stood then, looking at the firelight dancing across the children's faces, and he understood a truth that had taken him years to fully grasp. Life's value was measured not by what one achieved alone, but by the light one left behind in others. The center, the children, the volunteers, they were all living proof that even after everything is lost, the human spirit could rise stronger, brighter, and more enduring than ever imagined. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The center expanded, reaching beyond the hills, touching towns and villages Ethan had never imagined. The message was simple but profound. No matter the depth of despair, no matter the weight of failure, life could always be rebuilt, piece by piece, act by act, heart by heart. People came from all over to learn, to help, and to be inspired, carrying the philosophy that had saved Ethan's life into communities that had once believed they were forgotten. One late evening, standing on the porch as the sky turned deep indigo and stars shimmered like fragments of hope, Ethan felt the familiar stirrings of wonder and gratitude. He thought about his journey, the nights when giving up seemed easier than moving forward, the moments of doubt, the fear of failing again, and realized that every hardship had been a teacher, every loss a guide, every act of kindness a bridge to a brighter future. Liam came to stand beside him, a quiet smile on his face. "You've changed so many lives, Ethan. Have you ever thought about the full weight of what you've done?" Ethan looked out over the fields, the children laughing faintly in the distance, the fireflies beginning their nightly dance. "Every day," he said softly, "and every day I realize it's still just the beginning. There's so much more to do, so many hearts that need hope, so many lives that need to know they can rise." The night air was cool and alive with possibility. Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the pulse of life around him, the endless potential in every flickering flame, every twinkling star, every heartbeat echoing across the compound. He knew now that purpose was not a destination but a journey, one that required courage, persistence, and a willingness to embrace both the darkness and the light. He whispered to himself, not as a vow, but as a certainty, no matter how many times we fall, no matter how deep the loss, we rise. We rise, and in rising we carry others with us. The fireflies continued their dance, the river murmured its eternal song, and the world stretched vast and infinite before him, full of lives yet to be touched, hearts yet to be healed, and stories yet to be written. Ethan's journey had begun in despair, but it had transformed into something magnificent, proof that the human spirit, when guided by hope, love, and resilience, could create ripples that would travel far beyond any single life. And as he looked over the sleeping children, the fields bathed in silver moonlight, and the quiet, endless sky, Ethan understood the ultimate truth. The measure of a life is not in what is taken from it, but in what it gives back. Every act of courage, every moment of compassion, every spark of hope was eternal. And in that understanding, Ethan smiled, knowing that no matter what storms came, the light he had kindled would never fade, the legacy he had built would endure, and the world would continue to rise, one heart at a time. He stepped back inside, closing the door softly behind him, carrying with him the quiet knowledge that this was more than survival. This was triumph. This was life reborn. This was the power of the human spirit at its most magnificent, unstoppable, and endlessly inspiring. The night wrapped around the center like a protective embrace, the stars watching silently, the world holding its breath in anticipation of the countless lives yet to be touched. And Ethan, standing in the glow of the firelight and the echoes of laughter, knew that he had not only survived, he had created a legacy that would rise forever, carried forward in the hearts of everyone who believed, loved, and dared to dream.